Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we are going to be talking about Thorgal et la Magicienne Trahie, or the English title Thorgal and the Betrayed Sorceress. This is the first part of the first published volume of this series, published by Le Lombard, which is a fairly major publishing house in Franco-Belgian comics. This is a pulp style French comic, bande dessinee, which is fairly popular. It's a series that's been ongoing for quite some times. It had a few different adaptations, but none of which really caught on, unfortunately. This is a good story and good starting point for us to talk about French comics in general. First thing we're going to do, as usual, is look at our characters in this story. Three characters that are really important and they're the ones we are going to cover now. Our main character is Thorgal, full name Thorgal Eyerson. He is, from what we get in this story, an unknown quantity for the Vikings with which he lives. He is not quite a Viking, but was raised by them. Uh, he has a few different nicknames and that are linked to his actual name, Son of the Sea or Son of Thunders. He doesn't look like most of the other Vikings either. He has a look that is a bit more in line with the common, let's say, the common barbarian that we're used to talking about or looking at when we look at comics. Important traits for Thorgal is mainly he is uh, physically fit, he is agile, he does seem to have very good combat skills, as we see through the story. He is generally referred to as a skald or a bard. The scar he has on his cheek here, given to him by another character at the early point in the story, is one of his defining trait as we move on to the story. The second character that we're introduced to and that we is key to this story is Gandalf le Fou, Gandalf the Mad, who is the king of the Northern Vikings. He does have the Viking traits that we can see in his face here. He does have red eyes, which is an odd thing in general. You could say it's an artistic choice, once again, rather than a realistic choice. He is going to be our primary villain in this story. As the king of the Northern Vikings, he is greedy, he is envious, he is petty, he has many, many negative traits. In terms of shape, what we know from the story is that he is a good fighter, but he let himself go. And he is depicted as far bigger than Thorgal overall, most likely because of fat, which goes in line with all of those other traits we've discussed when discussing an evil king in a story. The last character would be the sorceress, la magicienne. Her name is not revealed through most of the story. We learn it far later on. She seems to be still a young woman, but does behave like she is much older. She's always accompanied by her wolf, which guards her and fights for her. She only has one eye and bright red hair. This goes in line with, once again, a lot of the, let's say, other pulp characters in the same kind of genre. Would remind you of Red Sonja or some of the other. Speaking of Thorgal, well, it's pretty easy to see that the original inspiration for him was Conan. There are key differences between him and the Cimmerian, but if you look at just the top level, the characters could be interchanged in some ways. One of the big difference, he is always referred to as a skald. While Conan is generally referred to as a thief, an adventurer, a pirate, He has those more warlike or fighting roles. Thorgal is a bit more subdued. He will be adventuring. Bards, well, it's one of those characters that you can use in stories to go on adventures, find new stories, and bring them up. But as soon as we know that term, we would expect them not to be the monster that Conan would be. He has many traits that are common with Conan: black hair, piercing eyes, a good physique in general. But Thorgal will be have that kind smile that the Cimmerian never really has. And when Thorgal is weak or in a moment of weakness, he will show human elements, desperation. He will show regret, remorse, things that Conan doesn't show. Conan is depicted more as a wild beast, a pouncing tiger or panther, while Thorgal would be the far more subdued character. Conan has driving elements, which are is lust for adventure, lust for life. He wants to do everything as big as possible. He will get a large stack of gold, go spend it all in alehouses, drinking it, eating it, doing other things with it. On the other hand, Dorgal's main elements and driving elements is love for his future wife and a desire for justice. Conan does have that desire for justice in many comics, especially the Marvel comics, which is a slight change from the original character or how the original character was depicted. Both of them mighty and strong, but Thorgal, he has much more smarts. The idea is that Conan can break out of any issues generally through his instinct and his sheer power. Thorgal, you will often see him in stories where he will think about what's going on and devise ways around it or around the conflict instead. Little fun aside, volume 27 of the French edition. I'm not sure if the English edition is in the same order. I do not think so. Thorgal is called Thorgal le Barbare. We're going to go through the story. So the story starts. Thorgal is set to be executed by his would-be father-in-law, Gandalf le Fou. And he is brought to the rings of sacrifice. Basically, rings on a stone where you put a prisoner, and he ends up drowning in the Northern Sea or dying of hypothermia. Thorgal's main crime is that he fell in love with Gandalf's daughter, Aricia. Uh, Thorgal is left to die on that stone. He does try to fight the rock and the chains and invokes the northern gods for help, but he resigns himself to death until the sorceress appears and offers him freedom in exchange for service for 1 full year. Thorgal does start by saying that he is too proud to accept this offer from a woman, but he realizes fairly quickly that it would be beneficial for him to accept. He makes sure to say that he will only serve her for a year and not a day more. After being released and getting some clothes back on, the sorceress, Wolf, and Thorgal go up in the deep mountains in the cold north. And at that point, the sorceress orders Thorgal to go and recover a chest guarded by a giant and a dwarf. This is a very Nordic kind of storytelling at this point. Thorgal has to climb the mountain to get to the top of it, to get to that particular chest. And at first, he fights a giant. It is a mythical creature. We can see he has green skin. He has beard that is defying normal physics. But overall, we're not talking about a 20-foot tall monster. Yeah, I would say probably 10, 11 foot tall, still a rather large creature, which would be in line with the Jotun of Norse mythology. Thorgal dispatches him mainly with his agility and his wit, tripping the giant to make him fall off the mountain, because he does realize very quickly that he would not be able to win the fight. But the sorceress did warn him that the dwarf would be the more dangerous of the duo. Thorgal gets into the fort itself where the chest is in, and as he gets ready to grab the chest, the dwarf appears and traps him into magical bars that constrict him slowly. Luckily, Charles, the wolf companion of the sorceress, ambushes the dwarves. The dwarf disappears, the bars disappear, and Thorgal can grab the chest and bring it to the sorceress. In the chest, we have a pair of bracelets, and those bracelets are the key to her ploy to get her revenge on Gandalf le Fou. The story then shifts to a feast day where Gandalf le Fou is gambling with other Viking warriors to say that nobody would be able to tame Thorgal's horse, Furel. We see only one person gamble, but when we look at Gandalf, we do see that he has a large stack of treasure in front of him. Everybody has to bet something to try to win the horse, basically. Thorgal sneaks into the feast, disguised as an old man, and says that he wants to try riding the horse. Everybody laughs, as nobody thinks an old man would be able to do it. But of course, Thorgal would be able to ride his own horse. But the plan is for him to lose, because he wants to be able to pass off one of the magical bracelet to the king. In order to do that, Thorgal nicks his horse with a stone. So the horse panics and kicks him off. And he gives away the bracelet to the king, who puts it on immediately. At that point, Thorgal reveals that he is Thorgal instead of an old man. And Alicia, Gandalf's daughter, just jumps into his arm to embrace him. Gandalf is quite mad at this, draws his sword to try to strike Thorgal down, but the magical bracelet starts squeezing on his arm, forcing him to drop his sword. The assembled Viking don't do anything to save their king, as the sorceress appears and state that they are afraid of him and actually hate him, so they will not actually stop them from taking him away. She binds him a little bit more, and they leave the village. Thorgal having to follow her, since he does have that 1 year pact with the sorceress at that point. He tells Alicia that he will come back as soon as it is done. A little later, it's not specific, but it's basically, we have an idea that it's pretty soon after Thorgal, the sorceress, and Gandalf are ambushed by brigands from another tribe, the Bande, which Gandalf had been basically at war with for at least a year. Gandalf at that point reveals the name of the sorceress, Sliv, and that the Bald would kill him if he captured him. And she replies that she has worse tortures in store for him. So rather than have all of them killed, she gives him a axe and tells him that he used to be a great warrior and he should be able to defend himself. Thorgal does draw his sword as well to assist in the fight. Thorgal and Gandalf invoke Odin's name and start fighting off the brigands who outnumber them. While the fight is unequal in terms of size of the forces, it's pretty clear that both Gandalf and Thorgal are far better warriors. But Thorgal is shown as the weaker of the two, as he starts being overwhelmed by the enemies. But he is saved by the sorceress's wolves. And at that point, they scare off the remaining Bald. But as they are leaving, a slinger just throws a stone and knocks Sliv, the sorceress, off. At that point, Gandalf tries to take the opportunity to kill her, but he is stopped by the wolf. Just steals the horse and tells Thorgal that since they fought together, he would spare his life, but knocks him down and knocks him out with a kick while dropping the magic bracelet at the same time. The two remaining people at the ambush wake up after a little bit and decide to track the Viking king. And it takes a little while. They find his horse eaten by wolf and a bloody trail leading towards the sea. Thorgal does try to tell the witch that they should show patience and restraint, but the witch, the sorceress, is in a hurry at that point and drives them both towards the sea as the nightfall. They see a fire in the distance, and the sorceress tells Thorgal to go and kill Gandalf because he's the only one who could have made the fire. As he gets there and tries to sneak up on the person at the fire, Alicia realizes that Thorgal is sneaking up on her and reveals herself as she had escaped the village to try to meet with him. At that point, she also reveals that Gandalf is nearby, injured, almost dead. Uh, Thorgal gets ready to kill him, but he also remembers that they fought side by side and he decides to spare him. Sliv shows up at that point and explains that Gandalf attempted to force her to marry him for 10 years while she was imprisoned under a tower, apparently, where she was deprived of everything. And she only managed to escape after losing her eye. Gandalf had lost his wife when Alicia was born and was trying to marry Sylv so she could grant him access to the wealth of her kingdom, which apparently lies beyond the frozen seas. And he reveals that she is also known as the Undying, sorceress queen that is known to enslave people to work in mines. At that point, Sliv decides to take matter into her own hands and kill Gandalf, but Thorgal actually stops her, saying that he prefers love and peace and that he is ready to stop a cycle of violence. Breaks his pact with the sorceress, but she does remind him as she leaves that he still owes her 11 months of service. She gets into an ice drakkar at that point and leaves 10 years after she was captured by Gandalf. The story ends that way, and it's easy to see it as a cliffhanger. It was not intended to be a continual series, but that particular ending probably guaranteed that Rosinski and Van Ham would have at least another chance to write stories for this character. Here we have the cover, which I used on the thumbnail and at the start of the video. We have the branding at the top, which is a standard branding for Thorgal. You'll always have the two Drakkar heads on each side, the name followed by the name of the volume. It was also used in the one video game that was made of Thorgal and the a board game that was used as well. If we look at the cover, the only thing I can say that I find a little bit weird, Thorgal does look younger on the cover here. It might be because of the height difference with the giant that he is fighting, but the traits on the character itself also make him look a little bit softer, a little bit younger. This is a very eye-catching cover. You've got bright colors. Might sound silly, but yes, bright colors will attract your eye. And there's a fight on the side, which will attract your eye if you're into swords and sorcery, trying to find a book or a comic to read or to buy. You've got all the traits that you could expect. And red-haired woman in the back, black-haired man, pretty easy to see if you know about Conan or if you know about Red Sonja, that could attract you as well almost immediately. Very good cover, in my opinion. The version I got was a typical hardcover Franco-Belgian comic. You do see every once in a while a soft cover version of some of those comics. Those would be older versions. I don't know if Thorgal ever had a soft cover version. We do say hardcover when talking about those Franco-Belgian comics, but you do have to be careful. They are soft hardcover. Basically, they are porous cardboard, so they are easy to scratch. They're easy to dent. They're not going to last an eternity if you have kids or if you are clumsy, like I sometimes am. I just bought the comics as an example, and there's already a dent at the top because I dropped it. So you do have to be careful if you want to keep them in pristine condition. The paper quality is higher than what you see in American comics or Japanese phone book comics. It's a bit better as well than regular tankobon manga. So it is a very decent quality paper. Still no gloss, still no additional protection to it. But having dealt with Franco-Belgian comics all of my life, I can tell you there's very little ink bleed. There's very little ink loss. Color palette for this comic is extremely nature toned. You could almost have Bob Ross paint those things. You don't have any harsh colors. You don't have any hard metallic colors either. We see gold, but it's yellow with a bit of bright on it. It's not the shiny gold you sometimes see in other comics, even other French comics. It's not as vibrant as you sometimes have in bande dessinee, especially in the comical bande dessinee, where the color has to be exaggerated for the kids to be really attracted to it. But it fits really well with what's going on at that point. It's a Norse comic. It's a comic about Norse mythology, more or less. Those are the colors you can expect in there. The line work in most bande dessinée, and this particular volume of Thorgal especially, is subdued compared to many American comics where you will have hard lines and you will see the inking of the shape of the face of a character. In this case, sometimes you'll just have the color make the shape of the character or the color make the shape of the clothing. So the line work is still there once you start looking, obviously, but it's not as significant as you sometimes have it in other comics. Word bubbles are extremely irregular in this comic. I've noticed a lot in American comics, word bubbles are very simple. They're bubbles. Here, the word bubbles are there to complement the image. They're literally there in a corner sometimes, taking a bit of the corner in a weird pattern just because, well, that's where the drawing would let you put the bubble. You can see that there's a bit of a difference in how it's done rather than, well, I'm going to draw, then put the word bubbles on it. The two are really intricate and working together. Are there advertisements in these comics? Well, one thing you'll have in Franco Belgian comics, you do have some form of advertisement. In this case, since it is a longer running series, what you really have at the back is all of the volumes that are available in the series and in the other attached series. So you have a fairly long list of pure Thorgal volume, and you have Les Mondes de Thorgal, which are the worlds of Thorgal. And in it, you will have stories of his son, stories of his daughter, and his youth. Those are quite a few books overall, but that's the main advertising you're going to get. What else can you get for this character? What you have as well on the last page is, I would say, a read order. How could you read this particular series if you wanted to read it in chronological order, more or less? I don't think all the volumes are on there, but you can see the different series, the main line with La Magicienne Trahie as the first one in this block here. So we do have it there, and it does give you an idea of, well, what's the next thing I should read if I wanted to continue this story. When we look at the art and the artistic merit we've got in this, uh, this is a beautiful comic. Overall, there's no way else of me saying it. Having read the further volumes, you do see an improvement in the quality of the art over time. One thing that I do find interesting, uh, it is a realistic looking comic, even when there's supernatural elements like the giant and the dwarf. but you still have a bit of comical exaggeration. And it's always almost perfect. You can see it well here in the picture of Gandalf le Fou. It does have the larger nose, the larger mouth. It's exaggerated to show the character more alive in a way. It's a pretty interesting mix of the genre. As I said, we don't really have a good full body shot of Thorgal in this particular volume. This is probably the best one we have. Him and his future wife, as they're looking at the ice drakkar leaving. I find that a little bit weird, personally. I think it would have been a good thing to have at least a full shot of the character ready for action. In further stories, of course, we're going to see more and more of the character, so it's going to be easier to identify him. There is a very good use of color throughout the comic. There's good lighting effects when they're by a fire or by a torch, like in the cave with the dwarf here. And it's very different from the DC comics I've also been reading at this point, which are generally quite dark. Neither the male or the female form is exaggerated. Yes, we have comical exaggeration, like with Gandalf le Fou, but when we look at Thorgal, he looks like a fit and able man, and Alicia does look like a good looking woman, but it's not over the top. They are dressed as they're supposed to be in a cold climate of the north. It's fitting for the characters what they have at that point. Easy to contrast with our good friend Conan, where you look at Conan and this is the peak and the ideal male form. And for the female characters in the same series, it's the exact same. Even if you have an ugly woman in a Conan comic, she'll still be attractive for some reason. One of the nice thing in this particular comic as well is the lack of dialogue. They do take advantage of silence and empty space within the comic. You've got large panels that are of no speech bubbles at all, just to show you what is going on. It does bring out the backgrounds very strongly as well. The backgrounds are quite detailed, as we see in this particular picture here. In the main fight scene, we also see a use of this silence. Yes, there's sound effects there, but what we mostly have is an image showing what is going on with no dialogue, no thoughts from the character. It's action to draw you to action. When they present some of the characters, we have no speech, no dialogue. This silence does bring the art out quite a bit. We can also see air a very good use of a background, which is rather detailed and does make you feel cold just looking at it. If we look at story elements in this particular story, it looks like a lot is happening overall when we do the full story overview. But the story is very simple and it's a very straightforward. Thorgal is sentenced, but he is rescued at the last second. He finds a magic weapon, gets his revenge, but he is denied. But he finally realized that he'd rather have love rather than revenge. It's a mythological story. It's the kind of story you would have in Greek tales, Roman tales, Norse tales. It's really there to teach a lesson to who is reading the story. We have mythological elements in it: the dwarf, the giant, the magic bracelets, the ice drakkar, but they favor the storytelling. They're not there to bring you to another world. They're not there to drag you into long explanations of how does the magical power of the rings work. They're just there. They're used as a MacGuffin device and simply let the character move forward. This was originally done, as I said before, as a one shot for the magazine Tintin. It wasn't supposed to be an ongoing series. The authors more than likely had an idea of what they wanted to do from what we see in that one shot. but it wasn't originally intended to start this long brand of comics. This is also not the actual start of Thorgal's adventures, but it's a very convenient point to introduce us to the character. That's when he has one of his bigger setbacks in his life, and also one of the points where you can also say that he has a great victory at the same time. It's a good setup for the character. He remains mysterious. The universe in which he is growing and in which he is moving is also mysterious. We do know that there's Vikings. It's in the north, but we don't have much more than that. We don't have dates. We don't have characters which give us dates either at this point in the story. We do say that he's different than Conan, however, in that particular regards. Conan, you can take him and send him anywhere in the world. You'll have his adventure, and when you start the next adventure, you'll have reset to the start. Basically, Conan's a sitcom character, if we follow the rules of sitcom by Paul Chato. It's a bit weird to say it that way, but that's what Conan is. Thorgal, on the other hand, you see as he moves through the story that he grows and that he lives in the world. He wants to remain in it. Conan doesn't want to remain, he wants to go. Is this playing to the strengths of the sword and sorcery genre? It's a very standard sword and sorcery story. I think we could transpose that with almost any sword and sorcery character, except maybe E-Man, and it would behave fairly well. It's a mythological tale of the North. Yes, we're talking about Vikings here, but you could replace Viking with any other name and it would still work. We do have a kinder hero than what we have in many swords and sorcery stories. He's not glory seeking, he's not bloodthirsty, he's not looking for fame. Does have inherent traits to mythology in it, and the oath being sworn and then broken is a very common trope of the mythological tale. And in sword and sorcery, it does happen every once in a while as well. We have supernatural elements in the story, but in the end, it's still a story about human characters. Okay, maybe Sliv the witch is not quite human, being immortal. Overall, you could replace her with an average scorned woman, and it would work still as a story. The supernatural elements are there to enhance the story rather than take charge of it. How's the pacing in that particular book? We did say before it's 30 pages and it does seem that there's a lot of things happening. If it were a manga, I'm pretty sure we would be looking at 3 to 4 chapters in there. The fight scene by itself would be a chapter, as an example. The climbing up the mountain, fighting the giant and the dwarf, that could be even 2 chapters on their own. So if you start looking, if this were a manga and a mangaka was doing it, how long would it have been? Probably not a full volume, okay? Not 144 pages or so. But it's not going too fast, okay? That's not what I'm saying here. It's engaging, it's well crafted, it flows well. You don't need those extra panels or those extra pages. But of course, if it were a manga, we'd expect it to be longer in a way. There are, of course, elements that could have been expanded on. I think it does suffer a little bit from having been commissioned as a 30-page story. It was made originally for for the magazine. So Tintin magazine, the way it works is that it generally you have stories written by someone and you insert it in the magazine and publish it with other stories. So it's made for that. And a lot of Thorgal stories you can see are made for that or split in a way they can be put in those magazines. If we compare it to an American comic, however, if and we're going to really talk here about modern comic, it's night and day. In those 30 pages, I have more things happening than in some 3-part limited series that I've read. There's more character development, there's more story being exposed, and less empty space. So while a manga would have taken longer, a little bit the same way as we're saying here, in the manga, it would have been basically to just stretch out some bits for especially stretching out the action bits. In modern American comics, unfortunately, we don't stretch the action bits as much, let's say. We have a lot of show, don't tell in this particular book. They show you what's going on, they show you what the situation is. While sometimes there is exposition, the exposition is there to show you why they've taken those actions. Everything is well wrapped up and well set up to move the story forward. It could have been kept as a standalone in the end. It would have been functional. The cliffhanger ending would have let the imagination of whoever read the Tintin magazine to imagine what would happen. But I'm sure at this point that the author made it end that way so they could pitch it to Lombard as to get a standard contract. It makes perfect sense to me at this point. Since it's a 30-page story and a regular book is, let's say, 40 to 44 pages for a Franco-Belgian bande dessinée, you have to fill up the rest of the book with something. There is a second story in that same book, Presque le Paradis, Almost Paradise, which is completely disconnected from La Magicienne Trahie. It's not the continuation of the story. I can't find any production history on Almost Paradise. I will cover that particular story. It's a lot shorter. It's 12 pages in another lecture. The, the themes and the messaging in this particular book, we're looking mainly at revenge. Revenge is at the heart of this story. Thorgal does want revenge for Gandalf le Fou that almost killed him, but he does realize that he is content with being with his lover and doesn't want to shed any additional blood. On the other hand, the sorceress still has or will or wish for revenge at the end of the story. It does leave the door wide open with Thorgal still having this 11-month oath to the Undying Queen, which is basically a Damocles sword over his head. We don't know when it's going to fall. We don't know what is going to happen with it. Another team we see here, and that one is separate, is incompetence of leadership. We have a failed king in this particular story. Gandalf le Fou, just his name, the Mad, doesn't bode well. But once you look in the story, you read through the things, you notice nobody respects him. His power base is collapsing as things go on. I mean, it takes only a man from outside to challenge his rule. He is a great warrior. We do see that in the story. He is the one in the fight against the Bald that overcomes the most of the enemies and the one left standing at the end. But once you look at the character design, he is rather fat. You see that he is complacent at that point in his power. He is cowardly, untruthful. He seems to have to be wrathful as well. The fact that he kept a woman imprisoned for 9 years in order to try to marry her does show that he has expectations above his status. We really see him as a failed king. Final thoughts. Very strong entry in what is a 40-year series now. It's been going on for quite some time. And while it is waxing and waning, I do think that there's been recent releases for it, of course, under different leadership and different authors. From the story we read here, we can fully understand why they got a contract to keep the series going when they started. Characters will evolve quite a bit in the future. They go to place where you might not expect them to go. But the fun thing is, this particular story gives us what we need. It gets our attention, and it gets me willing to read the next story and the story after. The art in the story is rather gritty and realistic. You do have the comedic style creeping in every once in a while in the scene where you see all the Vikings being told you're not going to help your king because you're afraid. It's almost something you would see out of Asterix, as an example. I'll be honest, I wasn't a huge fan of Thorgal when I was a kid. My dad used to pick them up when we went to the library. I read them because they were there, but they weren't, let's say, my first pick if I were to do anything. My dad liked them. My sister liked them. There might be a reason behind that. And as time went on, I did grow to like the character a little bit more, and then moved out of my parents. I hadn't thought of the character too terribly much until recently. So in the future, I do have one other Thorgal book at the moment, which is volume 6, which is the youth of the character and is truly his introduction. I'm not sure when I'll be doing this particular book or parts of this particular book, but it is a thing that we'll be looking at in the future. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day and enjoy comics. Goodbye.